My dear colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the ICA webinar on cardiovascular monitoring. In the next 25 minutes or so, I'll be dealing with the subject of direct arterial blood pressure monitoring, which forms a crucial point of patient care in critical care units and in operating rooms when we are dealing with high-risk patients and patients with cardiovascular disease. To begin with, I would like to say that the heart beats 70 times a minute and pumps 30,000 liters of blood through 100,000 kilometers of blood every day, blood vessels every day. This is an amazing pump, and we will see how the measurement of its functions helps us to understand the pathophysiological states of patients during the course of our management of these patients. When we talk of invasive hemodynamic monitoring, the first thing which we deal with is the direct arterial blood pressure. The arterial cannulation is indicated when we need a real-time, continuous, beat-to-beat monitoring of the blood pressure, and when we plan pharmacological or mechanical cardiovascular manipulations. The arterial cannulation is also needed when we need blood samples for arterial blood gas analysis, and whenever there is failure of indirect arterial blood pressure measurement, that is non-invasive blood pressure measurement. Additionally, the supplementary information we get from the arterial waveform is useful in determination of volume responsiveness of patients from determination of systolic pressure or pulse pressure variations. Coming to the sites of arterial cannulation, the most commonly used sites of cannulation are the radial artery and the femoral artery. Additionally, superficial temporal, axillary, brachial plexus, ulnar, posterior tibial, and dorsalis pedis artery can be used for arterial pressure monitoring, but by and far, the radial artery is the most common site for invasive blood pressure monitoring because it is technically easy to cannulate, and there's a collateral circulation present for the arm, and complications are rare. When we talk about the collateral blood flow, before radial artery cannulation, the collateral blood flow to the hand can be assessed by performing the modified Allen's test as is shown in this video. The radial and ulnar arteries are compressed while patient makes a tight fist to exsanguinate the palm and then slowly open the hand. As the occlusion of the ulnar artery is released, the color of the palm is observed. Normally, the color will return to the palm within several seconds, that is up to 10 seconds. If there is disturbed or reduced collateral blood flow to the hand, the palm remains pale for more than 10 seconds. This video demonstrates the technique of arterial cannulation. The hand is immobilized as is shown here by putting pads under the wrist, dorsiflexing the hand, and if the patient is conscious, local anesthetic is infiltrated and a skin nick is made onto the proposed site of putting the cannula after palpating the artery using the non-dominant hand, and the flashback of blood which happens into the hub of the needle indicate the presence of the cannula in the intra-arterial location. The femoral arterial cannulation is shown here. The femoral artery is probably the largest artery in the body, which is used for blood pressure monitoring. The site is identified, site of entry of the cannula is identified below the inguinal ligament. And similar to the radial artery cannula, the flashback of blood in the hub of the needle, as is shown here, indicates the presence of the cannula in the artery, and then the cannula is glided over the needle, keeping the needle stationary. Or you may choose to use a Seldinger technique as is shown here. The skin nick is made and the needle is inserted into the artery below the inguinal ligament. And once the blood flow is established, guide wire is passed through the needle and the needle is removed and the cannula is guided over the guide wire into the intraarterial location. And then it is connected to the pressure transducer system to obtain the pressure measurements. The next video shows the use of ultrasound to cannulate the radial artery. The local anesthetic infiltration is being done around the artery, and that can be seen in the video here. The cannula is inserted into the radial artery using the ultrasound guidance, and then the catheter is passed through the into the arterial location. The physical principles of pressure monitoring is highlighted in this. We are aware that arterial blood pressure waveform is produced by summation of sine waves. The fundamental wave is added to 63% of the second harmonic wave. This results in the pressure waveform resembling a typical arterial blood pressure waveform. The invasive blood pressure monitoring systems are underdamped second order dynamic systems that demonstrate simple harmonic motion which is dependent on the elasticity, mass, and friction. Now we need to know what is the mean arterial blood pressure. Mean arterial blood pressure reflects the area under the arterial pressure wave pressure form divided by the beat period, which is averaged over multiple cardiac cycles. This is dependent on device-specific algorithms, but for general understanding, mean arterial pressure is estimated by taking the diastolic pressure and adding the 1/3 of pulse pressure to this. And this is valid when the heart rates are low, because the duration of diastole is considered to be 2/3 of the entire duration of the cardiac cycle. Coming to the systemic arterial pressure waveform, the components of the waveform are shown here. We have the systolic upstroke, systolic peak pressure, then systolic decline, diacrotic notch, diastolic runoff, and the end diastolic pressure. What is important to note here is the concomitant ECG is shown in green, and we can discern that the electrical events precede the mechanical events by about 80 to 120 milliseconds. Coming to the influence of position, if the patient or the individual is supine, the direct arterial blood pressure and the NIBP, that is the non-invasive blood pressure measurement, are identical, but in lateral decubitus position, the NIBP recorded in the non-dependent hand is much less as compared to the dependent hand because of the effects of the gravity. That is amply shown in this picture. However, the direct blood pressure monitoring, because the transducer is level to the heart level, will monitor similar readings irrespective of the presence of the cannula in the right or left sides of the patient's radial artery. Coming to the physical characteristics, there are 3 physical components of the pressure monitoring when we talk about direct arterial blood pressure monitoring. These are the natural frequency response, and the damping coefficient. Natural frequency refers to the frequency at which the system resonates by itself and amplifies the signal and produces the result or digital reading on the monitor. And this is dependent on the diameter, length, compliance, and density of fluid contained in the system. Larger the diameter, lesser the length, lesser the compliance of the tubing, and lesser the density of the fluid contained in the system, better it is for the accurate reproduction of the arterial pressure reading on the monitor. The second parameter is called as a frequency response, which is the ratio of the measured and input amplitude at a specific frequency. Ideally, it should be 1, which means that the measured frequency is same as the input measured reading is same as the input reading. The third parameter is the damping coefficient, which indicates the rate of dissipation of energy of a pressure waveform, and it should be typically 0.4 to 0.6, and there are no units for this measurement. This recording shows the underdamped arterial wave pressure waveform, where the systolic pressure is showing overshoot, and there are non-physiological waveforms which distort the arterial waveform. And when this happens, it's very difficult to find out which is the dicrotic notch. Is this the dicrotic notch, or one of these is the dicrotic notch, which becomes important, especially when you're dependent on the dicrotic notch to determine the time of trigger of a, especially when you're using the intra-aortic balloon pump. But if you look at the actual blood pressure, it is 126/63, but because of the underdamping, the systolic pressure is overread and the diastolic pressure is less. However, the mean arterial pressure will be similar in both the readings. This, the tracing on the left upper quadrant shows the overdamped arterial pressure waveform, where the systolic pressure is lower than normal and the diastolic pressure is higher. However, the mean pressure is likely to be same as in an optimally damped waveform, which is shown on the right side of the upper panel. How to know the natural frequency and damping coefficient? For this, we do a fast flush test. That is, we need to pull the tag on the transducer and leave it suddenly, which produces secondary waveforms on the pressure tracing, and the distance between the adjacent oscillation peaks determines the natural frequency, whereas the height of the adjacent peaks, tells us about the damping coefficient. The pulse wave, as it passes from the center to the peripheral arterial system, it becomes amplified, and when compared to the pressure in the aortic arch, the more peripherally recorded femoral arterial pressure waveform characteristics are shown here. The pulse pressure becomes wider in the peripheral artery, and there is a delayed upstroke as compared to the central artery in the peripheral artery. And thirdly, the dicrotic notch becomes more slurred as we reach the peripheral artery. This is again shown in this diagram. As we are progressing from the central artery to more peripheral artery, the systolic pressure increases, the diastolic pressure decreases, but the mean pressure remains the same, and there is attenuation of the dicrotic notch. This is a pressure wave reflection which occurs in the elderly patients as a result of stiffening of the arteries. The pulse pressure increases, and there is a late systolic pressure peak. These are the pathological conditions which influence the shape of the arterial pressure waveform. The first one shown on the left upper quadrant is the normal waveform. The arterial pressure scale is shown on the left side, whereas the pulmonary artery pressure scale is shown on the right side of the tracing. And here in the normal situation, there is coincidence or the upstroke of the pulmonary artery pressure and the artery pressure waveform almost coincide with each other, which is not the case in aortic stenosis. There is a delayed arterial pressure upstroke and the peak also is delayed, which causes what is called as pulsus tardus or pulsus parvus, where the volume of the pulse is low and there is delayed peaking of the systolic pulse wave, leading to this difference in the peak of the pulmonary artery and the arterial pressure peaks as is shown in this picture. And in patients who have arterial aortic regurgitation, there's a double peaking, which is called as pulsus bisferens. And in patients who have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, there is a spike and dome pattern as is shown in this picture. And in patients who have pulsus alternans, every second beat or the second wave is smaller as compared to the previous one as a result of left ventricular dysfunction seen in these patients. This must be differentiated from pulsus bigeminy, in which the arterial trace again shows every second beat to be a weaker beat. But the difference is that in the ECG, in pulsus bigeminy, ECG will show ventricular bigeminy as compared to pulsus alternans, where there is a normal sinus rhythm in pulsus alternans. In the pulsus paradoxus, the normal dip in the systolic blood pressure, which is seen with inspiration, is exaggerated. That is, when we take inspiration, the systolic pressure is decreased as a result of intrathoracic pressure changes. And this is exaggerated in patients who have pulsus paradoxus. And this is pulsus paradoxus is actually an exaggeration of the normal physiological response to inspiration. And this pulsus paradoxus is typically seen in patients who have cardiac tamponade. In patients who are an IABP, this pressure waveform is shown. There are 4 cardiac cycles, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this is the diastolic augmentation occurring as a result of intra-aortic balloon counterpulsation. In this left ventricular assist device, the balloon is placed in the descending thoracic aorta distal to the left subclavian artery, and the balloon is inflated during diastolic period. And here what we are seeing is 1:2 ratio of the heart rate and diastolic augmentation. This is unassisted diastolic pressure. This is the unassisted systolic pressure. This is the dicrotic notch. The diastolic augmentation is occurring here. And then this is the pressure, diastolic pressure after diastolic augmentation, which is lower than what was seen here. And this is the systolic pressure after diastolic augmentation, which is lower than this pressure. These two indicate that there is decrease in the afterload as a result of the use of intra-aortic balloon pump. The next aspect I would like to touch upon is systolic pressure variation. In patients who are on mechanical ventilation with a tidal volume of at least 8 ml per kilogram, and when the patients are fully sedated and paralyzed, there are cyclical variations in the arterial pressure waveform as a result of the inspiration and expiration. That is the respiratory cycle. So during inspiration, the systolic pressure increases, whereas during expiration, systolic pressure decreases. And this difference is called the systolic pressure variation. And if this systolic pressure variation is greater than 13%, 13%, it indicates hypovolemia. Similarly, pulse pressure variation can also be determined, and which the difference between the maximum pulse pressure and the minimum pulse pressure divided by mean pulse pressure of the two gives us the pulse pressure variation. And this is also an index of volume responsiveness and is considered to be a dynamic indicator of the preload of the patient. So this is again shown here, the systolic pressure and the pulse pressure variation as a result of cyclical changes in the intrathoracic pressure imposed by mechanical ventilation when the patients are totally paralyzed and sedated, and when we are using at least 8 ml per kilogram of body weight of tidal volume. This shows the Frank-Starling relationship with respiratory variations in arterial pressure. This is the filling pressure or the preload, and this is the stroke volume as a result of the contractile function of the heart. And this is the Frank-Starling curve. And in the ascending portion of the limb, as the preload is increased, there is a proportionate increase in the stroke volume, but in the flat portion of the curve, there is no further increase in the stroke volume with increased preload, which means that the top portion or the physiological limits of the Frank-Starling relationship has been achieved, and hence any further increase in the preload will not increase the stroke volume as is depicted in this picture. And here we could use the relationship between the systolic pressure variation or the diastolic pressure variation, the pulse pressure variation, which is determined by looking at the arterial pressure waveform in the monitor. Here, the stroke volume variation or systolic pressure variation is greater than 13, whereas here it is less than 10%. I would also like to mention here that the Acumen hypotension prediction index has been developed by the Edward Life Sciences. This is the first of its kind predictive decision support software which detects the likelihood of patient likely to develop hypotensive events 10 to 15 minutes before the hypotension actually occurs, by looking at the algorithm which has been developed by this company. And it is possible to prevent the hypotension when we exceed a value of 86 on the hypotension prediction index monitor. This is dependent upon the arterial pressure tracing waveform, and this monitor, this software depends upon the 5 parameters which are depicted here: the systolic phase of the arterial pressure, the diastolic phase of the arterial pressure, the systolic phase of the systolic rise phase, and systolic decay phase of the arterial systole, and the overall decay phase. Taking these 5 parameters into consideration, this software dictates or determines the hypotension prediction index, and this is a promising technique. We need to see how it is going to help us in preventing hypotensive episodes in the patient's management during intraoperative or critical care settings. We also should realize that the mean arterial pressure, which is the lower limit of mean arterial pressure, is stated to be 65 millimeters of mercury. But in hypertensive individuals and diabetic individuals, this auto-regulation is auto-regulatory limits are shifted upwards and rightwards, and hence this whatever we think that 65 millimeters is appropriate may not apply to these individuals, and that's why we say that one size does not fit all, and the personalized care of patients comes into picture in this context. In conclusion, I will say that the presence of anesthesiologists in the operating room or the intensive care area is the most vital monitor when we look at all these monitoring devices. The presence of anesthesiologists is absolutely mandatory, and the eyes and hand hands and ears of the anesthesiologist or physician taking care of these patients has a vital role in determining the safety of the patient. Invasive arterial pressure monitoring is indicated in major high-risk surgical procedures, in cardiovascular procedures, in thoracic procedures, intracranial procedures, etc. And accurate measurement and interpretation is necessary for favorable outcome. And invasive monitors have their advantages and pitfalls. And knowledge of pathophysiological variations is mandatory to provide optimal care of these patients. Before I conclude, I would like to invite you for this IACTA DE webinar, which is being held this month between 20th to 22nd. It's a virtual webinar. Please join us. There will be world-class deliberations on transcatheter echocardiography. There are about 100 eminent experts from across the globe who will be participating. And there are some interesting features in this seminar, which include Golden Fate contest. And thank you very much for the patient hearing. Thank you once again, and please join us for the next ICA webinar on Wednesday. Thank you very much.